All right, you guys, I am going to try to make this video as quick as possible. It's a pretty simple concept. I think you guys are going to pick up on it really quickly, especially because, and I should have emailed this to you already. I'm going to double check on that though, so don't be hurt if you don't have this already, but I'm going to try to get it to you. Most of this book hasn't been sent to you, but I tried to scan in a lot of it, and I think it's going to do the job. But today I want our lesson to be on bony landmarks and kind of getting the feel for those. So a bony landmark is a portion of the bone that either is very okay, well, muscles will attach to these landmarks, as well as they just give you an idea, like a landmark would, as you're traveling through the body, gives you an idea where you are located in the body. We talked about like anterior and posterior and those kind of terminologies, but these landmarks give us way more specific information about directions around the body. So some of these are going to be pretty common terms here. You can see these highlighted words. So the first one here is crest. Is a common word that we're going to be finding in the body. A crest is a bony ridge. Facet is going to be a smooth surface of bone, usually articulating. And we know what articulating surfaces are. For example, this surface of the humerus is going to articulate with the socket in the scapula, making your shoulder joint. So articulating surfaces. Facets are usually found more in the spine. So we'll talk about that when we get to the spine. We're not going to really talk about the spine today. Foramen means a hole in the bone. These holes provide passage through bone for blood vessels and nerves. A fossa is going to be a shallow depression. When I think of fossa, I remember fossa with the word valley. Valley is a shallow depression, just like a fossa. So that's a good way to remember that in your notes. Notch is obviously just an indentation. You're going to have things travel through notches, and we'll explain more of that later. Process, tubercle, and tuberosity are going to be bumpy areas. So you're going to have like a process is going to be a large outgrowth of bone, like a big knobbly thing, knob type thing, and then a tubercle is going to be a bump or swelling, mound-like. Tuberosity is going to be many bumps. So think of tubercle as a bump. Tuberosity is a city of tubercles or bumps. Easiest to remember it that way. So city of bumps, tuberosity. Bump, tubercle. Big process or projection, outgrowth of bone, process. Okay. Okay, I've given you some printouts about the spine, but I want to focus more on the curvatures of the spine. I have a lot of professionals, they get stuff like this mixed up, so I just want to talk about it a little bit. In your spine, you have this S shape, okay? The first 7 vertebrae, they're going to be your cervical region. The next 12 vertebrae are going to be the thoracic region. Then your lumbar is going to be the last 5 down here. And your sacral region is obviously your sacrum. And that actually has 5 levels as well. You just don't see them because they're all fused together. So let's talk about those curvatures. Let's see if I can zoom out a little bit. The cervical region and the lumbar region share a similar curve that is pushed a little bit more ventrally, if you can see that. This is a lateral view of the spine. and we call that curve lordotic. Now, if you had an excessive curve that was just too curvy, we would call that lordosis. Don't get confused. Some professionals use the word lordosis for a lordotic curve. Same goes for the kyphotic curve, except the kyphotic curve is curved more dorsally or to the posterior, and people with excessive kyphotic curves have kyphosis. That's their pathological condition. So lordosis, kyphosis are the excessive curves. Just their regular curve, though, their natural curve is going to be lordotic and kyphotic. Going through these curves as well, if you were to have a lordotic curve happen in your thoracic region, let's say that your thoracic region suddenly started curving the other direction, that would be considered lordosis as well, because it would be going lordotic, and it would be excessive because you have not a kyphotic curve. Okay, the sacral, they give it a weird term here. I'm just gonna let you try to see what we have going on here. You see that curve here with the kyphotic curve? See how that's mirrored with this curve? They try to give it a concave anterior-inferiorly curve. I'm just gonna say it's also kyphotic. You can see the mirror, how the cervical region is mirroring the lumbar region. Kyphotic curves are mirrored in the thoracic and the sacral regions. Kind of a fun little note to take in the study of the spine. So that shape gives you a spring in your step and support for your nervous system. So pretty important stuff. Okay, you can see a pretty big picture here of the sternum. I've zoomed out so you can see the entirety of it. The sternum has 3 bones that are fused together as one to give you that structural rigidity. The top portion looks kind of like someone tied a tie, is the manubrium. That's the manubrium here. Obviously the body is going to be this big section here. The xiphoid process is this little piece here. All of them together, they create the sternum. So easy enough, right? I know we're jumping around here, but take your time going through the video. If you need to pause, take a pause. We're going to talk about the ribs really quickly. We're going to talk about the 3 categories that they're put into. Technically, it's 2 because floating would be underneath faults. But the first classification or category is true ribs. The first 7 ribs are termed true because of the costal cartilage. So let's break down costal cartilage. We have costal, which means rib, and cartilage, which is connective tissue. So rib connective tissue. Let's zoom down here. Sorry, my dog is going a little crazy. We have this little section that you can see here. That would be the costal cartilage. It's rubbery and it connects the ribs to the sternum. That gives a little bit of a rebound effect. If you were to get hit in the ribs, it's not bone to bone, and that would cause a lot of more breakages in the ribs. This costal cartilage gives some flexibility to your rib cage. Now, the true ribs are connected directly into that sternum, but your false ribs are categories false because their rib connective tissue or their costal cartilage does not join to the sternum directly. It is joined through the true ribs costal cartilage. You can see these false ones down here. They don't have a direct connection, but it's via the true ribs that they're connecting. And then your last classification, floating ribs, the bottom 2. In this case, if you look at both sides, there's 4 of them. They do not connect at all. You can see the little nub there. So easy enough. There's the ribs. Won't spend much time here. Your hyoid bone is a U-shaped bone positioned anterior neck. So it is actually a connection point for muscles of your tongue and some of your ventral neck muscles. Everyone has a hyoid bone. If you can guess what it is, it's the Adam's apple. Even females have Adam's apples. I'm sure you all knew that, but it is more pronounced in some males, some females as well. But that is an important attachment site here for muscles of the tongue and some of the neck muscles here. So we'll talk about that more later. Just a simple overview, not much time. Let's scoot on down. Okay. This is why I pause the video before I scoot down. Okay, we're on the clavicle. And when we're talking, when we're learning the bony landmarks, we want to talk about the description of the bone, their etymology. The word arises from a Latin word, clavus, meaning key, and ul is little key. So, fancied resemblance to an ancient key. We're going to talk about the orientation of the bones as well. So you can see on this bone, it's a clavicle. There are two extremities on the sides of the bone. One is the sternal extremity and one is the acromial extremity. The acromial extremity, it's a little bit difficult to remember, but the acromion is a point on this scapula, which is your shoulder blade. The scapula has an acromion. This is where your clavicle is going to attach to the acromion on the scapula. Now, coming this direction more medially, you're going to find the sternal extremity where it attaches to the sternum. And that's pretty easily understood. We know where the sternum is. Now, coming this way, you see a little tubercle. Translate that from your head dictionary. Tubercle is a bump. Pretty easy to remember. The conoid tubercle. Write that down and share it with someone you know because it's going to get confusing here in a sec. Conoid tubercle. Why is it conoid? Maybe because it looks like a cone. Not 100% sure, but we can always Google it. So looking at here at this bone with the acromial over here and the medial section over here, this would be lateral. I would say we're looking at the posterior side of your clavicle. Now dropping down here, you would be looking at the anterior portion because you can see the medial section is here, lateral section is here. That bump is more on the back or the posterior side. So I know the drawings are a little bit more difficult in an actual real skeleton, you can definitely tell. But hopefully I'll get to show you that to you guys sometime. Okay. Onward and upward to the scapula. The scapula is a large, flat, triangular bone of the pectoral girdle. It sits posterior to the rib cage, and it covers the 2nd to the 7th ribs. So you guys know exactly what that sentence said, right? Because of your sweet anatomical knowledge. Okay. Coming down through here, we have some good points that you will take notes on, but good enough for you. I actually have these blank. So if you have the ability to print the blank ones, it gives you a great opportunity to review, to practice on the blank copies, using these ones obviously as a reference. So let's talk about the orientation here. When I'm looking at the orientation of the scapula, I'm looking for one thing to determine if it's posterior or anterior view, or the dorsal or ventral side that I'm looking at. And that is the spine of the scapula right here. The spine of the scapula is always going to tell me this is the dorsal or posterior side of the body that I'm looking at. So looking up through here, I don't see a spine, I see a big valley. That would be your subscapular fossa. Break that word down. Sub is below, scapula is here, subscapula, below the scapula. The valley, or the fossa, that is below the scapula. If you were to massage someone and try to touch this area on them, you would actually have to dig underneath these scapula, touching. There's a big muscle here that attaches and comes all the way from this edge here, all the way through, touching to the head of the humerus. Okay? Let's go fling ourselves across to the acromion, which we already talked about, which attaches to your clavicle. Remember that? The acromial extremity attaches to the acromion, and just in front, or more ventrally, you're going to see the coracoid process. So remember how I said the conoid tubercle is going to be difficult to remember? It's because the coracoid process is here, and there's another one that sounds similar. So write these down, get them in your memorization bank. Looking at the rest of the scapula, it's easy to see that you have an angle here that is superior to this angle down here. Inferior angle, superior angle. I'm going to rush through this pretty quick, but I want you just to be able to understand the lingo. Because once you get the lingo down, everything else falls into place. We know what a process is. It's a big knobby area here. We know what an angle looks like. It's superior to which angle? This is inferior angle. Pretty simple stuff, right? Now, if you look over here, there's a medial margin or a medial edge. There's a lateral edge. That's something that can help you in memorization of looking at which side am I looking at, dorsal or ventral. Medial is going to be towards the spine, lateral is away from the spine. I want to talk more about this section here, so I'm going to go a little bit more slowly. Your glenoid cavity is the socket to which your humerus is going to fit into. Now, there are tubercles on the bottom and on the top. We know what a tubercle is. It's a bump. So let's not forget our lingo. We know what tubercle is. It's a bump. We know what glenoid is. Glenoid is the cavity. Now, infra has similar terminology with inferior. Infraglenoid tubercle, the bump that is inferior to the glenoid cavity. So infraglenoid tubercle. Infra is also the beginning thing, like in infrared. Infrared is below red. Infra is another word that could mean below, but I don't want you to get confused with sub and infra. Okay, just kind of remember inferior, infra, inferior. Now there's also a superior or a supraglenoid tubercle, and that one is located above the glenoid cavity. So the bump above the glenoid cavity, or the tubercle that is superior to the glenoid cavity. Easy enough, right? See, you guys are picking it up. I can see the light in your eyes shining because everything's turning on for you right now. Coming down to here, we already have understood the acromion. It follows the spine along. But there's two fossas that I want to talk about here. Remember those valleys. The word for valley is fossa. Infraspinatus or spinuous and supraspinous. I say spinuous. I would probably pronounce that spinous. Infraspinous, supraspinous. Why do you say spinous and supra and infra? Obviously because there's a spinous area, there's a spine, and one of the fossas is superior and one is inferior. So infraspinous fossa and supraspinous fossa. Now remember, this is the posterior side that we're looking at, so don't get confused. Just take it slowly. For your homework, I would like you, if you can't print it off, maybe you could put sticky notes onto your computer or something and send me a picture. I would like for you guys to send me a filled out copy of the blank version of this. I have sent it to you, I believe. Just, if it works best for you, send it by a phone message. If it's easier for you to email and scan it back into me, that is just fine as well. Coming down to the humerus, there is a proximal half that is more superior and a distal half. And we're going to talk about the superior one first. The proximal half here, we have obviously the head, and we have two tubercles. One is lesser, one is greater, and they are these big bumps here. We know what tubercle means, right? And there's a space in between that we call the intertubercular groove. Break that down. It's a groove. Inter means between. Intertubercular groove. Intertubercular groove. Muscles will attach here, so remember that. The groove between the tubercles, greater and lesser. Coming down to the center of the bone, you have the deltoid tuberosity. You're going to see this quite often in the body, that some of these landmarks are named after the muscles which attach there. Your deltoid muscle, which is a shoulder cap muscle, is going to insert into this attachment site, this little city of bumps, the tuberosity. Okay, let's scroll down here. On the distal portion, we have what is called epicondyles, lateral and medial. Condyle is the word in Latin for knuckle, and epi means upon, so upon the knuckles. These two sections here, maybe they don't look like knuckles to you, but to someone, they had to name them epicondyles. And one is medial, one is lateral, and which can tell you the direction of the bone that you're looking at. Usually if you see the two tubercles, you're most likely going to be looking at the ventral or the anterior portion of the bone. At the very most distal end, you're going to see the trochlea and the capitulum. Your radius is going to attach here, and your ulna is going to attach here. And they're going to swivel around this articular surface, giving you the elbow joint. So let us continue down, looking at the posterior view. One of the main reasons that tells me this is the posterior view is on the distal portion here. You can find a valley that is the olecranon fossa. Olecranon is the word for elbow that we are going to use in our anatomy class. Olecranon is the bumpy process that you can feel directly on yourself when you bend your elbow in. That is what's going to fit into this little valley of the humerus. Again, lateral and medial epicondyles, and then the trochlea. I'm going to show you this right now just because it makes a lot more sense. Scrolling down to the ulna, the trochlea notch is going to rotate around this smooth articular surface, giving you the movability of the elbow joint. This particularly is going to be the anterior portion that we're looking at. At the very bottom here, we can see the actual olecranon, which would be the posterior side, showing you the pointy piece of the elbow. Alrighty, looking at the coronoid process here and the radial notch. Radial notch, that's pretty easy. It's a notch, but the radius is going to come in contact at this articulating surface. So radial notch. Coronoid process, remember I told you coronoid is going to sound very similar to those other words. Go back in the video and search them up. They are definitely not the same words, but they will get you. So remember those, because they will be very difficult to remember unless you write them down or share them with someone you love. even if it is your pet bird. Okay, ulnar tuberosity. We know what tuberosity means, city of bumps. And it's obviously on the ulna, so we call it ulnar tuberosity. The distal portion here, we can see the styloid process. Remember, like a stylus from the 90s on your Palm Pilot. This is what it looks like, styloid process. Okay, coming down here, you can see that as well. Talked about the olecranon, it's your elbow. Well, not the actual joint, but it's the hard portion that's bumpy and very, very hard to, if you were to hit someone with this area of your body. Not that I've ever hit anyone. The radius, it's pretty simple. There's a styloid process at the distal portion, radial tuberosity, and head of the radius. Let's go down, talking about the hands. You'll see this stuff in your printouts. Finally, lower limb. Lower limb, lower limb. The os coxa. The os coxa is formed from 3 separate bony elements that fuse during development. Your ilium, ischium, and pubis. So I'm going to show you here. This is an anterior view because you can see the anterior superior iliac spine. And if you say that with an accent, you'll probably remember a lot more. The anterior superior iliac spine. The name is Bond, James Bond. Just kidding. Okay. Iliac crest, we know what that is. There's this bowl-like section here that if you put 2 of them together, your sacrum would fit right into there. No noise. You can't talk while I'm talking. No. No barking. Thank you. Okay. Hey, watch it. Your ilium is this big bony section here. Your ischium is this bottom arm, and your pubis is this top arm. So this is where your pubic, when people say, oh, I hit my pubic bone, which people do often for some reason, this is where it would be. So looking here, superior pubic ramus, inferior pubic ramus. Ramus means arm. Okay. The pectineal line, that is named after a muscle. Don't stress if you're not understanding that, because we haven't talked about muscles yet. So don't worry. Pectineal line, superior pubic ramus, inferior pubic ramus, ischial ramus because of the ischium. Now, looking at the socket where your femur is going to pop into, you have the acetabulum. I can't tell you how to remember that. Just remember, that's the acetabulum is the socket. Now, we have 2 little spines here. We're just talking about these bony ridges, really. Anterior, inferior iliac spine, anterior, superior iliac spine. They are shortened in a lot of textbooks to AS, IS, and the bigs. Not that you have, okay. For a morning